Greetings, everybody. I'm Jeremiah.
That's him.
She's Vania.
That's me. Welcome to another episode of the Beard and Curls podcast, where we talk about dating, relationships, marriage, mental health, and so much more.
So what are we talking about today, love?
Today, we're going to be talking about critical thinking.
And trust me, you don't want to miss this. Cue that intro.
What's up, guys? It's your girl, Margot Bingham.
Karen Parsons.
You're now tuned in.
You're now tuned in.
You are now tuned in.
You are now tuned in
To Beard and Curls.
Beard and Curls.
Beard and Curls.
Beard and Curls. Keep it locked.
Our guest today is a critical thinking specialist, originally from Wales in the UK, now living in Perth, Australia. She's passionate about helping people think clearly, make decisions, solve problems, and live aligned with their values.
You know her, you love her. Bethan, welcome to the show.
Hi guys, thanks for having me.
So as a critical thinking specialist, how would you define critical thinking for those who may not be familiar with this concept?
Okay, so I like to say it helps people think clearly and make decisions, but it's a bunch of skills, attitudes, and a bit of knowledge that people can apply to any situation, business, personal, relationships, whatever it may be, to just help them think clearly, essentially, get past biases, fallacies, things that get in the way of our thinking really clearly about the things that are most important to us.
Awesome.
That's awesome. And I know that you have a critical thinking compass. I saw it on your Instagram page.
Yeah.
Can you share a little bit about the steps?
Yeah, sure. The whole concept is helping people find direction, and particularly, I've just created it in the last few weeks because it summarizes all the key skills that are part of critical thinking. And a lot of people are kind of feeling that lack of direction, uncertainty. There's so much, strange things happening in the world this year, and a lot of things coming to a head. So anyway, the skills are number one, reflection. So just really taking the moment to, go for a walk or have a shower or really think about the stuff that's going on. Reframing. So this is using mental models or particular questions to look at things from different perspectives. Doing your research, obviously, is really important for critical thinking, but then evaluating that research, making sure you're not being biased. Something like, confirmation bias always comes into when you're Googling something, you go, do I have cancer because I have a lump on my knee, kind of thing? And go, Dr. Google says, yes, of course you do, But that applies to so much stuff, that confirmation bias particularly. And then step 6 is about deciding, actually making a decision, because when we don't decide and we procrastinate, then there's, different costs to that we often forget about. Communication is important with critical thinking, and I think we'll talk a bit about that today. Listening skills, understanding, but also how you're conveying a decision that you've made or something that you're going to do, and then taking action. I think that's really important. People can get caught up in this. Critical thinking is about philosophy and sitting back and observing and not really doing stuff. But I'm very pro it being really practical and helping people move forward with whatever is the situation that they're in.
We're talking about decision making. Can you share a little bit more about that part, like how this tool can help with that?
I have a little decision making dice, which I sometimes use, which is super fun. Shall we do a quick?
Yes, please.
Okay. So it's kind of based on Edward de Bono's 6 thinking hats, but it's just, I'm obsessed with making things fun because years and years of education, in education, teaching, lecturing. If it's fun, people remember it more. So anyway, you roll the dice, and depending which thing it lands on, that's the angle that you look at the decision from. So if it's this one, it's pessimistic and cautious. So, what's the worst thing that could happen? Or if you're being really careful, what would you do? Your gut feeling section or emotions, like how do you feel about the different options? Mm-hmm. So perhaps if there's one that like really scares you, it's useful to think about it in that one. Optimistic and brave on the yellow one. So if you just really going for it, what's the best possible outcome? So, coming on today, I was like, okay, pessimistic. I might say something silly, but, this might be awesome. I might meet some great people and I get to talk to you guys. So that's fabulous. Rational and neutral is more like, what's the most likely outcome, or what would your sensible friend tell you to do? And then what else we got? Down the track and values. So we talked about values, but also in 10 years' time, what will you wish you would have chosen? So that's really useful for those really big decisions. You go, right, what would Vania in 10 years wish she'd done at this point? And then last one's creativity and alternatives. So what are your other options? And this is actually, I think we get stuck often in like a false dichotomy of like, I've got A or B. And then you can think, right, what's Y, what's X, what's Z, what's the completely left field idea that when you first say it, you go, oh, that's crazy. You couldn't do that. And then you go, oh, hang on a minute. Maybe we could make that happen. And yeah, it's super fun doing the alternatives, what else you could do. So yeah, heaps of stuff, heaps of tools.
Yeah, no, I love it. I think I totally agree with you that when something is fun, you remember it. Like when I saw it in your hands, I'm like, what is that? So
I want one. I don't know.
Yeah, right. I've got a few wooden like prototypes, but I don't know if you saw on my stories the other day, I've bought a big blow up version. So I'm going to like stick them on. So when I'm with a big group, we can throw it around. But my friend who also does training was like, you're going to need to sterilize it between each person touching it. I'm like, throwing an inflatable object at people feels okay. An inflatable object with hand sanitizer attached to the side sounds like more of a health and safety risk than just touching. Yeah. We'll figure it out. This new world that we're in.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, I like that. So do you, like when you use that, do you usually go through all the sections that you explained just now, or do you just pick one? Like how do you use it?
Yeah, it depends on the session. So occasionally I'm asked to do something quite quick. So I'll just sort of, put it on the board with the different things and we'll throw a couple. But what's really nice to do is getting people in pairs or a group of three and getting them to focus on like one person's big decision or problem at a time and then letting them talk it through. So, but, something like the green one, you go, right, okay, we've got alternatives. One again, what's another alternative we could have? So you can kind of go through them all. It's just a way to mix it up because sometimes when you know what's coming next, your brain is already like thinking about that rather than like a spontaneous, what's your quick response to that?
So let's talk about genuine curiosity and listening skills. So can you please share a little bit about the importance of these two things when it comes to critical thinking?
Yeah, sure. I guess the curiosity is just that being open to different ideas. We all do it. Even people that have Nobel prizes in biases and awareness, like Daniel Kahneman, we all have these biases, and we all have core beliefs that are, they're part of our identity. They're part of who we are, and it's quite scary to challenge those. But just being open to speaking to people who hold the opposite view can really help us like understand why they believe something so different to us, and that listening, like we talked about just before, like there's kind of lots of different theories on listening, but listening to win, listening to fix, and listening to understand. And if you can hold your biases and when you're triggered on something back a little bit and just allow someone the space to talk and share their story, you can take so much away from that rather than listening with that bias at play of like, right, how am I going to beat your argument on this? How am I going to beat your argument on this? Because, everything we listen to, everything we read is written with an intention, with an objective, and often it's to persuade you to think or act a certain way. A newspaper article will have some bias to it and it will be presenting you with the facts from this side. And we can get very caught up in like, oh, that's right. Whereas if we go to a different publication, we hear the other side a bit. It's, weighing it up for ourselves a bit. I mean, you do need to decide, and that's what a decision is basically an argument with yourself, looking at the different options. But then you do need to decide and move forward and say, right, well, I believe this based on where I'm at now. But if someone then presents you with other evidence, it's really important, I think, for humanity that we go, oh, maybe I was wrong. Maybe I do need to look at things from a different perspective, or I didn't consider that. And there's a lot of that going on for people at the moment. We talked about Black Lives Matter happening and the importance of amplifying people's voices on this, and making sure that other people are hearing them rather than staying within our echo chambers and just listening to people who are like us, essentially, and making sure that there is that diversity represented. So curiosity is really important. And, having small children, they teach me every day about how to be curious and how to be playful with something and how to think about an idea without necessarily taking it to heart. It's really cool.
Wow, that's awesome. I'd like to kind of follow up on something you said, though, Bethan, like as far as like listening to understand. And so a lot of times people are trying to like listen to respond. So how can somebody challenge those biases to be able to kind of put this into practice as far as being able to listen to understand rather than listen to respond?
Yeah, I think practice is the biggest way to improve on it. So when I take people through my course, I set them the task to find someone that they strongly disagree with. So, for example, in terms of climate change, I've got quite strong views on that based on science, and how urgent I believe it is. And so I wrote a letter to someone in politics who was very, just seemed completely opposite to me, and challenged myself on that, just trying to listen to see what is the difference. And it's essentially about the values that he was holding were very conservative, very much about safety, and keeping things secure and not risking things. And so trying to frame things, I had to understand that and then try and find like a common ground that we could work from. I think if it's someone you've never met before, establishing some kind of rapport to begin with is great. And it doesn't have to be related to the topic. Just going, oh, hey, I like your shoes or something, to keep things warm. Because if you come at it very adversarially, and you guys would know this from your relationship coaching and counseling, if you come at it from an adversarial conflict point of view rather than hey, I'm a human, you're a human, we actually have lots of similarities in terms of the ways that we think, maybe we can just have an open conversation. But yeah, lots of practice. But it's amazing, we're all just people at the end of the day, right? And yeah.
Yeah, no. And another thing too that I like that you talked about so many times already is the values piece. That's actually one of the favorite things that I enjoy doing with my clients, especially early on in treatment. Like I really like to identify like what are your core values. And I also heard you talk about core beliefs. But if we're just staying on the values, like one of the things for me that I always want to make clients aware of is like values are your guiding principles. And so those are the things that you essentially live your life around. So if your values are not aligned with your goals and things like that, then you're just going to find yourself kind of doing that checklist approach. And I think you kind of mentioned that. So I'm supposed to do X, Y, Z, and then I'm supposed to have this outcome. But then at some point, something's going to come to a halt where you're like, oh, I'm not truly happy, because at some point you're going to realize that your values are out of whack. So I do at least 2 to 3 sessions with clients just around that, because I feel like it's that important. So in your work with clients and working with values, what are some of the things that you do to get clients to really become more aware or engage with some of their values?
I guess, like you said at the beginning, I like to get them to do either a few exercises if we've got time, or prior to a session, getting them to, there's a couple of quizzes I like to use, send them to get them to, do that thing where you compare, all right, if it was this versus this, which is stronger for you? And then having those discussions, about how does your current situation fit with those values, or what are you doing to honor those values? Because if you're not acting in line with them, then you will eventually get to a point where you go, this is not what I wanted. Friends who work for, I won't say the names of them, but some very big companies based here in Perth, the companies go off and do volunteer work, and they do lip service to sustainability projects and things like that. But at the end of the day, they're profit-making companies, and that's what guides all their principles and all their decisions. So when they do something which causes outrage, blowing up a sacred place, or starting a new mine in an area that doesn't want it, people go, oh gosh, I can't believe they did that. And you go, well, what's their guiding values? It's the bottom line, essentially. So it's so important, and I think they kind of shift as you go through life a little bit, so it's useful to go back and then reflect a little bit. Like, obviously there's some that are real core, but something like having children can change your values and change the way you look at things. And I know a lot of friends who, since starting a family, have altered their way of being in order to be more in line with the values that are actually their true core values. We often have like a turning point where we say, okay, no, I need to make some changes here. And that seems to be one of the triggers for people that I've observed, but I'm sure you guys have seen lots of reasons why people have those changes. Yeah.
Right. Definitely. There's a number of things that could come up where somebody's faced with the reality, like, oh, okay, I haven't been aligned with my values. And then once they get that, light bulb moment, then it's like, okay, now I need to take action towards living out those values on a regular daily basis.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So take me through like your journey with critical thinking. So what drew you to this particular concept?
Okay, so I was interested in it anyway, and I was kind of reading around the peripherals of it. And then at my work, they needed someone to write a critical thinking course for international students coming into a master's level course. Because depending on the education system, some places are very hot on it. And I find actually in the States, the fact that debating is quite popular. So some of those things around building arguments is taught explicitly in the States, from my understanding. It might be different places. Whereas in some cultures, there's more of a rote learning, you get the facts and you feed it back kind of a situation. So it's preparing overseas students for that element required in the Australian curriculum at that level. So yeah, very confident me. There's what they call the Dunning-Kruger effect, where when you're first given a task, your confidence is up here. You probably know this one, right? And then the more you learn, the more you go, oh my God, I don't know what I'm doing. And then gradually your confidence builds back up. So I was like, yeah, sure, I'll write this course. This is a few years ago. And as I learned more, I realized I needed to learn a lot more myself. But then, I just got really into it and realized how important the skills are for everyday life, for any situation. So whether it's, doing a class with my 5-year-old, this kindy group, or teaching executives, CEOs, or people who've retired, or personal situations, whatever it is, it always applies. It can always be applied. I just got, to a point where I was like, I need to try and get this to a wider audience. And that's why I started the Instagram and online course and things like that, just to, get it out there so more people could access it. I try and make sure it's not super academic. Obviously there is academic information and I reference things, but from a, the language point of view, trying to just make sure that's accessible to anyone, essentially, because it's such an important skill.
Mm-hmm. And who would be your ideal client when it comes to this course?
Honestly, it's for anyone. And the ambition for me is to tailor it so that, there's a version which is more for, say, like kids at school. And when I've done decision-making workshops, a lot of people are saying, oh God, my teenagers need this to decide for their future. But then also, mums with small children, because I've got small kids, you kind of attract people who are similar to yourselves. A lot of people say, oh, decision-making is really hard for me because it's just constant asking you, making decisions for yourself, but also for the family. But then also like people with in leadership roles where they sort of struggle with the overwhelm and, all the research shows that decision fatigue is real, and by the end of the day you don't make good decisions and you do shy away from risk a bit more. So people in those kind of roles quite like it too, just as something to hook the thinking onto, rather than just be like, oh, I don't know, that one, whatever, I don't care kind of thing. Yeah. So yeah, all different people.
Yeah, that's good to know.
Awesome. So, Bethan, I wanted to kind of go back to something you touched on earlier. You started to talk a little bit about the Black Lives Matter movement. As you can see, we're like in a different, time in our history now because of what happened with the George Floyd tragedy. So I've seen, like, from Instagram and things like that, that there's been massive protests in large number of countries around the world. What's been the scene like where you're from, like Perth, Western Australia? How's it been out there?
Okay, so obviously the context is quite different in Australia, but the messaging still works and is still very applicable because Indigenous Australians, I forget all the stats off the top of my head, but they make up a very small proportion of the population in Western Australia specifically, and a huge percentage of people incarcerated are Indigenous. And also there's been many deaths in custody, and it's about having that voice. They in the newspapers around town, they're not visible and they don't have that voice to, like, they're getting it. And it's funny, I think there was Australian reporters over in America going, oh, we don't really have an issue with race in Australia. And you go, yeah, we do. It's just not as vocal and isn't as well publicized, but people are starting to come around to that idea. And it's been great to see a lot of like the pairings of influential people on social media giving their platform to someone else to allow them to speak up. So yeah, there's been a protest in Perth. There was a lot of discussion about health and safety around the COVID-19, and we're currently almost back to normal, but big events aren't back on. But the Premier said he wasn't going to tell people not to go because that would probably encourage them to go more. And I was at that demonstration. There was a lot of people, but everyone was very spread out, wearing masks, and there was hand sanitizer everywhere. But yeah, I think it's changing, but I really hope it's not. And I'm sure, like, the same in the States, things are reaching this crescendo point. It feels like that something's got to give. And I don't know whether we'll have to wait and see in Australia whether there will be this continuation of focus on the issue, because as with anywhere, the media will jump on something, talk about it endlessly, give it a spotlight, and then the following week something else has come along. So yeah, but I think it's been good for Australians to become more aware of the fact that this is in our backyard, and something that we all need to know about, because there's a lot of people like myself who have moved to Australia over the years and maybe don't have that context, that knowledge when we first arrive. We just go, okay, right, we just carry on like normal, and then go, oh, actually this is important for everyone to know about. Social media is it's a tool for positive and negative, but the beautiful thing about it is that people are able to speak their truth and be very honest and open to camera about their experiences, and others can go, it takes you have to go out of your way to find people who are not in your usual, top of the feed kind of whatever. But it's been great that people are sharing those voices and letting them be heard more, and listening to try and understand, to try and say, okay, well, it's not my experience, but it's their experience. And you can't invalidate someone's experience. You can't just say, oh, well, I don't believe you. I don't think that happened. Like, yeah. And so when there's a chorus together saying, you need to pay attention to this, then yeah, it does really, yeah, raise that awareness.
And that's kind of like, to that point, like, you're in Australia, we're here, and we could be talking about the same thing because it's really that relevant to all of us. And so even like, like you talked about the indigenous group of Australia, maybe people didn't think that was an issue, but now they're being confronted with that and says, okay, so we do need to pay attention, even in our own backyard, that there's still work done here too, and we can't be oblivious to those facts.
Yeah, I mean, there were some people who were saying, oh, Black Lives Matter, it's an American thing. Why are people importing it to here? But the message behind it is essentially the same as what we need here. It's like we need to, just, and it's such a crazy thing, to argue against you. Oh, they don't matter? What are you trying to say? Like, so those that say don't protest it, but why? Why not? Like, why not? Amplify these voices that need to be heard. And it's a big problem in Australia. And there's more attention to it, like we were saying. So that's a good thing.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that's a good thing. I think one thing that really happened is that awareness that at least people are waking. What's the word? Waking up.
Waking up. Yeah.
Yeah.
At least people are waking up now to see how things really are, because only when you know or see how things really are, you can make changes. So I think worldwide this is having an impact, and hopefully positive changes will come out of this, changes that are structural. And
and it's definitely starting the conversation, and that's the first step. It's that prompt to have a conversation with different people, different experiences, and then going, right, maybe there's something to this. And there definitely is.
You also talked a little bit about like being part of a community, 55 plus community, and how that was beneficial for mental wellness. Can you share a little bit about that?
Community is one of my core values. And so, anytime I'm like, oh God, my neighbor needs help with her mobile phone that she's put on airplane mode again. And I have to stop the car and get out and try and fix it for her. And then you can be like, oh God, that's annoying. But also I just think that's something that has really made a huge difference to her day. I mean, she can make phone calls and it's 2 minutes out of my day. So yeah, it's those little things. And pretty much anything in life, it's about those little repeated actions that you do that create the big things, whatever that big thing may be. So whether it's the weekly podcast episode, or I don't know, the date night, or exercise, whatever, it's the repeated little things that build up to the big things, rather than those one-off special events that you might do. Yeah.
Definitely.
I like how you said that community is one of your values. You picked up on that too, right? Because it just makes it clear that when something is your value, you kind of like commit to it, like whether you know it or not. It's like that commitment that you do subconsciously or intentionally. So I think there is so much power in the awareness of value. So
exactly. Like your core values. So to me, it's like knowing that will help you to say, oh, this is a situation that I can actually embrace or appreciate, because you've already identified what your core values are. So I think it's definitely, again, not to sound like a broken record, but the importance of identifying the values and doing that work. All of us need to do that work.
I was speaking to a doctor from the University of Western Australia who specializes in organizational values, and he showed me this chart, the Swatch model, and it shows which values are in opposition with each other. And he was saying there's certain ones which are kind of similar. So often, if equality is very important to you, you're often quite self-directed, and also benevolence was close to that. Whereas, if money and power and status are important to you, they're like in direct opposition. But he was saying, if you've got a company that, or a community that attracts everyone that's like in this top corner, you're losing out on thought diversity and being challenged on certain ideas if you don't have anyone who represents the other corner. So it's funny because we're attracted to people who hold similar values to ourselves. But it's good to, find out and try and understand what's gone into this person's experience and life to make something else very important to them. And obviously you can have things from different parts of the grid, but it's kind of useful to see where the tension points might lie. And very interesting to identify that. And if you're a couple maybe and you're at opposite ends, then that would cause a lot of conflict, I imagine. Do you see that in your practice? Do couples often have similar values, or do you get ones that are at extremes?
I do couples coaching, and also I do encounter that. If you just look at it from the perspective that opposites attract, for the most part, right? So if opposites attract, that means that you're different, right? You're different. You may have, even when you have similar values, you may implement it in a different way. You see what I mean?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So how do you implement if family is your value, or if equality is your value? What does it actually mean to you, and how do you implement it? Or if power is your value, like what type of power? Like it is. So you can like break it down even when you share the same value. So I try to really break it down and focus on the individual, like on both individuals, and focus on what things actually mean by doing role plays and by using analogies and by really, really make it personal.
That's good. Yeah, that's so important. And I think when, like you said, people get hung up on like, oh, I value, I don't know, status, and they feel like there's only one way to achieve that status, then they can get very stuck in that mindset. Whereas there's, lots of different ways you can become a strata manager. I mean, but there's lots of different roles that give you that status and that power in whatever format that you want it. So that's really cool, thinking about different ways to achieve that. Definitely.
I like what you said about status, because some people may find that important, like their career path, like being promoted and going from a supervisor to a manager to a director to senior director to CEO. Maybe that is important to them, but maybe somebody else like defines status as building genuine relationships in the organization, and they don't necessarily have to have a specific title. Of course, they may value growth, but they find status and value in building relationships. So that's their wealth. So it's like two completely different things, but that can be defined with the same word. So
yeah, cool.
How can someone find you online?
So Instagram or LinkedIn. So Instagram, I think you've got my thing there, Bethan Winn Critical Thinking. LinkedIn is just me. There's not many Bethan Winns in the world. And then my website, bethanwinn.com.au, has got lots of information on there too. But yeah, drop me an email, say hi. It's great to hear from people. And, you never know. You get the decision matrix out, like, oh, who's this Jeremiah guy from the States on LinkedIn? You look familiar. and here we are, so yeah.
Yes, I will say this though, Bethan is as nice as she comes across. So anybody who's wanting to get in contact with you, you are truly the real deal when it comes to
oh, thank you. Oh, don't worry, it's not all sweetness and light. I have my moments. We're all human.
Definitely. So no, but Bethan, definitely thank you for taking the time. We truly appreciate everything you share with us and all your insights.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Well, there you have it, folks. That's our show for today.
Thanks again for tuning in.
And as always, like it or not, Beard and Curls is the new his and hers.